This is the story of Slash. More than just a guitar player, he's the Renaissance man of hard rock. Fans can't keep their hands off of him. He has managed to endure a career alongside one of the most unstable vocalists in rock and roll history. He's been ripped off by record labels, and even had an ex-wife threaten to put a mob hit on him if he ended up cheating. He has worked to lay down tasty guitar solos only to have them get drowned out by the drummer's girlfriend having a good time in the vocal booth with the singer. It's no wonder that over time he's become slap happy. But one thing is for sure, Slash is one of the most popular and most in-demand guitar players in the music business today.
Like, subscribe, thank you.
Saul Hudson was born July 23, 1965 in London, but raised in Stoke-on-Trent until age 6. Then he moved to LA. Slash sometimes went to work with his mom and rubbed elbows with a few top film and music stars. Actor Seymour Cassel gave him the nickname Slash because he was always zipping around in a hurry. Now, at 14, Slash had a life-changing experience. He was trying to hook up with an older girl. She finally invited him over, and they smoked pot and listened to some Aerosmith, and it blew Slash's mind. He kept replaying the album and totally ignored the girl. Riding his bike home, he knew that his life had changed. Now he had something that he could actually identify with. In '79, Slash decided to form a band with his friend, Steven Adler, who would later become the drummer for Guns N' Roses. It never materialized, but it prompted Slash to take up an instrument. At the time, Steven Adler had claimed the guitar, so Slash ended up choosing the bass. But at his first lesson, the teacher played Brown Sugar by the Stones. Slash was dumbfounded, and at that point he just quickly switched over to the guitar. His first guitar was a one-string flamenco guitar that his grandma had given him. And he started taking lessons and practicing up to 12 hours a day on that old beat-up pawn shop special. Slash put aside his BMX bike to focus on the guitar. He went to Beverly Hills High School with Lenny Kravitz and Zorro, learning Come Dancing by Jeff Beck. His biggest influence was a defining moment. Slash described the feeling as fucking awesome. In 1981, Slash joined his first band, Titus Sloan. And from the early demos of this group, Slash already had his style together. He had developed that crushing heavy blues sound, working the wah a la Hendrix. He'd later refine his tone. In '83, Slash and Steven Adler got together and formed Road Crew, which they named after the Motorhead song, We Are the Road Crew. This was after a failed attempt to join a local band called London. Steven Adler gave up the guitar spot to Slash and got behind the kit. And Duff McKagan, who had become GNR's bassist, answered an ad they had put in a Recycler magazine and joined the lineup. The demos for this particular lineup show Slash's metal side. The recordings and the performances on them were pretty rough around the edges. It's a wonder that by the mid-'80s, Slash and Steven would really have their sound carved out. They auditioned singers like Ron Reyes from Black Flag, and they worked on the main riff of what became Rocket Queen. Slash ended up disbanding Road Crew in 1984. Already there were problems with Steven Adler, as his work ethic didn't match his and Duff's. But nevertheless, Slash and Steven Adler then joined Hollywood Rose with Axl Rose and Izzy Stradlin. Hollywood Rose turned out to be the precursor for Guns N' Roses. And Slash and Izzy made a great guitar dual assault team. Axl's signature wail was on full display, and by this point, Steven Adler had actually improved greatly on the drums. The song Anything Goes, which was featured on Appetite for Destruction, was written during this time as well. And it's pretty wild hearing an early rendition of this song, knowing how it came out on Appetite for Destruction. After Hollywood Rose, Slash played in Black Sheep and then tried out for a band only to not get a call back. As a matter of fact, he would end up losing the gig to CeCe DeVille. Slash had tried out for Poison when their original guitar player Matt Smith had left. Bret Michaels was completely sold and wanted Slash to join the lineup. However, the bassist Bobby Dahl and drummer Ricky Rocket opted for CeCe instead. even though, according to Brett, he had actually done his homework while CC barely learned any of the tunes and instead wanted to just play his own stuff, telling the band during the auditions, "I've got these other songs, you gotta hear them." But it worked out, at least, because one of those songs actually turned out to be Talk Dirty to Me, which was their first real big hit. Plus, another thing is that CC DeVille actually completely outdressed Slash, showing up with his hair teased up with hairspray and wearing stiletto heels. Slash did not stand a chance. But again, it worked out perfectly. Guns N' Roses started coming together in '85 when Axl Rose and Izzy Stradlin, who were playing together in Hollywood Rose, hooked up with Tracy Guns and Rob Gardner from LA Guns. They merged the two bands and came up with the name Guns N' Roses, taking part of both names. The lineup was Axl, Izzy, Tracy, Ole on bass, and Rob on drums. But it didn't last long. Tracy and Rob both ended up bailing after a couple shows. So in '85, Axl and Izzy recruited Slash, Duff, and Steven Adler. And they hit the LA club circuit hard. The Whiskey, Roxy, Troubadour. They ended up opening for bigger acts throughout '85 and '86. And before one 1985 gig, Slash shoplifted a top hat and silver concho belt. And those two combined ended up making his trademark look. He had said he felt really cool in the hat. During '85 and '86, GNR wrote their classic tunes, Welcome to the Jungle, Sweet Child, and Paradise City. And their wild and crazy behavior earned them the rap as the most dangerous band in the world. Slash said they were always a catalyst for controversy, before even signing a major label deal. And of course, the major labels came sniffing around. In March 1986, they inked a deal with Geffen Records. In July 1987, GNR released Appetite for Destruction. It went on to sell over 28 million copies worldwide, 18 million in the US alone. The best-selling debut ever. Opening with Welcome to the Jungle, those delayed guitar licks were the entry to an album that would revolutionize rock music. Axl comes in screaming, and then the band just starts slamming the groove. Welcome to the jungle! This album is well produced, and yet this band has this sleazy punk vibe going along with this upper mid-range hard rock. People didn't know what to think. They're likening this new band to something remotely like Motley Crue, but a whole hell of a lot crazier and intense. Sweet Child of Mine hit #1 in the summer of '88, totally propelled by Slash's iconic intro lick. Sweet Child of Mine has a pretty interesting story behind it. In 1986, Slash was just messing around on his guitar at the house, and this is where Guns N' Roses used to crash. So he comes up with his cool lick, Izzy starts playing some chords behind it, and Axl heard it and it just grew from there. But at the time, it was just another song to them. Nobody was expecting it to be a big hit. So they put it on Appetite, and after the album had been out for a while, the song just took off. To this day, Slash is surprised that it had such staying power. It's been used in movies like Thor and Step Brothers, but for GNR, it was the song that made them megastars. And Sweet Child of Mine also remains, along with Stairway to Heaven, as one of the most banned songs to play in music stores nationwide. Another first in recording came during the recording sessions for Appetite for Destruction. While engineer Steve Thompson was mixing Rocket Queen, Axl approached him and said, "Hey, we need some real sex noises on this." So Thompson's like, "Oh, sure. I have a whole ton of 70s skin flicks. I could splice them together and get the audio that you want." To which Axl said, "No, I need the real thing." Steven Adler's girlfriend, Adriana Smith, happened to be hanging out at the studio at that very time. So Axl went right up to her and said, "Hey, let's do it in the vocal booth." To which Adriana replied, "Okay, I'll do it for the band and a bottle of Jack Daniels." So Axl told the guys to mic it up, and the guy tasked with actually doing the miking up was like, "Are you fucking kidding me?" For one thing, he was weirded out that it was Steven Adler's girlfriend, but nevertheless, they got the mics all set up, and Axl and Adriana started going at it. And at one point, things got so heavy that Axl and Adriana knocked over a mic, so one of the guys had to actually duck back into the vocal room and readjust the mic. So the person, Victor DiGlio, got credit in the liner notes as Victor the fucking engineer DiGlio. Of course, it was kind of revenge on Adriana's part. Apparently, Adler had said something to the effect that he didn't want to be called a boyfriend, and that's what prompted her to go hang out at the studio anyway. And then when Steven Adler found out, he completely flipped his wig. And where does Slash factor into all of this? Well, he had just blissfully laid down a tasty slide guitar solo. The happenings in the vocal booth stole his thunder. Not long after Appetite blew up, GNR Lies came out in November of '88. It's a short album, just 33 minutes, half live tracks, half acoustic. The acoustic songs were written and recorded fast in just a few sessions. Producer Mike Klink called it a magical rock and roll moment. Patience was the only hit single, hitting number 4 on Billboard in '89. And this ended up being the last album with drummer Steven Adler. And so Lies captures the classic GNR lineup right before things started getting really crazy. The raw acoustic stuff showed a different side of the band, the calm before the storm. But with mega success came mega conflict. During a 1989 opening gig for the Stones, Axl threatened to quit if members didn't stop dancing with Mr. Brownstone, his not-so-subtle nod to their song about heroin. And Slash was one of those who promised to clean up his act. The Use Your Illusion albums showed GNR heading in a new direction with their sound. They didn't totally ditch the hard-hitting, aggressive style from Appetite for Destruction, but Use Your Illusion definitely had a lot more variety going on. Bits of blues, classical, metal, punk, classic rock, even an attempt at rap were all mixed in there. Axl and keyboardist Dizzy Reed brought in some piano playing on a bunch of tracks, which also added a new dimension. Use Your Illusion 1 also has 2 out of the 3 songs that make up this video trilogy thing that they were doing. November Rain and Don't Cry. The third one, Estranged, ended up on Use Your Illusion 2. Another big change was bringing in Matt Sorum, the former drummer from The Cult, to replace Steven Adler. Adler had gotten kicked out of the band because of his heroin addiction, and it really messed with their sound. Izzy Stradlin said that Adler's drumming style gave the songs this certain swing and feel, and when that was gone, nothing really worked the same. Izzy would have rather kept going with Adler, but they had already waited around for 2 years and just couldn't put off things any longer. After his stint in Guns N' Roses, Steven tried out for AC/DC, but that got completely sidelined by Axl Rose. Axl had announced Adler's firing, calling him a drug addict in front of everybody. AC/DC's manager had actually offered Steven the gig, but then ended up taking it back once word of what Axl said got out. So Adler ended up reforming Road Crew with some guys from the band Vane, but it wasn't long before his drug problems got in the way again. Steven Adler just found himself sitting on the couch, getting high while watching TV. So a year after being let go, Steven sued his old GNR bandmates. He had said that he had gotten fired due to the drugs he was taking in order to get clean, and apparently those drugs were also messing up his playing.
That you had 2 alternatives. You could either be kicked out of the band then and there, or you could sign the document and agree to go on probation, correct?
Yes. So we told him exactly what it was about, but Steven's never really known exactly what he was doing, apparently.
Steven claimed that they had made him sign a contract that fined him $2,000 every time he did heroin. And he maintained it was really just them paying him $2,000 to get lost. They had taken his royalties, his writing credits, and everything. They were just simply done with Steven. But in '93, they ended up settling out of court. Adler ended up getting $2.25 million and 15% royalties for all the stuff that he had played on before. It was a pretty sweet deal, but things never really looked up for Adler too much. In '95, he ended up getting busted for heroin, and in '96, he actually had a stroke from a speedball, ending up with half of his face paralyzed as a result, totally affecting his speech. He became more violent at home. Nevertheless, after the lawsuit, the band was able to make a clean break from Steven and move on. A lot of the songs on the album were actually written way back in the early days of the band. And Civil War was recorded when Adler was still in the group, and you could hear how it reflected the original GNR sound. November Rain was one of the songs that Axl Rose said in early interviews that if you like Sweet Child of Mine, just wait for the next album. It took off, as did the video, with Axl dressed a bit like the Seinfeld pirate getting married, only for Slash being the derelict ring bearer. But Duff McKagan comes to the rescue. Then Slash ends up outside the church with his Les Paul standing in the middle of nowhere, and we all know that when that Les Paul goes vertical, you know things are about to go down. The cover of Paul McCartney and Wings' Live and Let Die is particularly strong. For one thing, they were completely faithful to the arrangement, so it was more of an update sonically without losing the original essence. More current rock fans of the time were introduced to one of Paul's most iconic songs of his solo career. But during the recording sessions of Use Your Illusion, Michael Jackson had pulled Slash in to do a couple songs from his Dangerous album. And of course, Slash was no stranger to chaos in the studio, but nothing on the level that came from the Michael Jackson camp. They had dates set, and wanting to be punctual, Slash would show up and then sit around and do nothing. It was driving him out of his mind. It literally got to the point that Slash thought that maybe Michael just didn't want him on any of the session. He was finally able to show up and lay down a couple rhythms for the songs, and eventually everything came together and he laid down a scorching solo for Given to Me, which is an intense ballad kind of all along the lines of Dirty Diana, which Steve Stevens had played on before. Slash remembered that the recording process was both creative and sterile at the same time. There were a lot of chopped up samples that would get pieced together. What really boggled Slash's mind about it, though, is that Michael would book studio time for like 10 years, and then show up maybe once a month or so to actually work in the studio. Nevertheless, Slash would work with Michael again a few times over the next decade. In November '91, he would join Michael live for the MTV 10th anniversary special, where they jammed out Black or White. Slash ended it with a bang by hurling his guitar through a car windshield. Slash said over the years that he observed Michael was a lot more comfortable when he was on stage or in production. The moment the work would stop, all of Michael's hangers-on, pulling him here or there, and yes, people swarming him, and he observed they're all just completely full of shit. The Slash wasn't a stranger to the whole fame thing, but the guys in Guns N' Roses never experienced it to the level Michael Jackson did by any stretch. All of the crap tied to fame obviously wore Michael down, and Slash was one of many witnesses to his slow decline. In May of '91, Guns N' Roses embarked on the Use Your Illusion tour, lasted 2.5 years, and that tour definitely was not without its drama. Axl ended up busting his foot early on, but managed to hobble around the stage in a cast, and then on July 2nd, all hell broke loose. While the band was playing Rocket Queen during a show at the Riverport Amphitheater in St. Louis, a fan was in the crowd taking photos. Axl noticed and yelled to security to take the damn thing away from them. But security apparently was moving too slow for Axl, so he took matters into his own hands, saying, "I'll take it, goddammit," and jumped into the crowd. Axl ended up wailing on a couple audience members and the security team while the band kept jamming on Rocket Queen. And finally, crew members were able to pull Axl back up on stage. Rose then grabbed the mic and said,
"Thanks to the lame-ass security, I'm going home."
The rest of the band all looked at each other kind of confused and sauntered off as well. And then the entire crowd of 15,000 got pissed off and launched into a full-scale riot. They tore everything up, throwing and busting chairs, hell, even attacking the plants and shrubbery. The damage turned out to be around 200 to 300,000, the equivalent to a gajillion nowadays. The band headed out to Europe, and so Axl did not get arrested until they actually returned to the States. But the judge ended up finding Axl innocent, and so he was off the hook. The Slash did another appearance on an album, showing his ability to groove hard. Slash and Lenny Kravitz had gone to high school together, and hadn't hung out since they had graduated. When Lenny was at the American Music Awards, with GNR winning a couple, Lenny was seated right behind the band. Slash and Lenny kept looking back and forth at one another, with it dawning on them that they actually knew each other from high school. They ended up getting together and hanging out, and Lenny invited Slash to lay down a solo for Fields of Joy on his upcoming album. Slash wanted to keep doing retakes, but Kravitz just went with the first take to keep it fresh. And then they decided to get another tune in. Lenny Kravitz and Slash came up with Always on the Run during a quick day-long jam session based on music Slash had come up with previously. But depending on who you ask, Kravitz may actually have another GNR band member to thank for the song, Steven Adler. Slash was finishing the Illusions tour in Europe. After the last show, he took a Concorde from London to New York, arriving at 9 a.m. Slash had Kravitz get a gallon of vodka and some ice, and then they got right to it. Kravitz played drums and Slash played guitar. Then Kravitz overlaid some guitar, bass, and sang. He brought in horn players to finish the song. Slash ended up flying to LA the next morning. Hearing Slash more in that vintage vibe showed that he can lay down some seriously greasy funk. Now, Slash had said in an interview that he had played Always on the Run for his GNR band members, but they didn't record it. It really came down to Adler. Steven Adler could rock, but apparently he couldn't kick out the nuances of that groove to be able to pull off something like Always on the Run. So the song ends up becoming a really big hit for Lenny Kravitz, and it's still covered to this day in bars around the globe. And that September, they put out Use Your Illusion 1 and 2, which debuted at number 2 and number 1 on the US chart. No other group had done that before. In November, Izzy Stradlin left the band suddenly and was replaced by Gilby Clarke. The tour ended in July of '93, and that November they released a cover album called The Spaghetti Incident, which definitely wasn't as successful as their other albums. Of course, having a Charles Manson penned song probably didn't help matters much. But at this point, Slash was starting to get frustrated, especially since it seemed like his input was getting vetoed at every turn. Slash wrote some great songs for a follow-up to Use Your Illusion, but Rose and Duff rejected them. Soon after, Slash sold his place, the Walnut House, and moved to Mulholland Drive. He set up a small home studio over his garage, which he called the Snake Pit. And there he started working on demos for songs that he wrote during the tour. Slash worked on the demos with Matt Sorum. Gilby Clarke and Alice in Chains bassist Mike Inez joined them later, and they jammed and recorded most nights. These became the demos Slash had tried to get into GNR's repertoire. And that same year, Guns N' Roses ended up going on hiatus. Slash ended up adding former Jellyfish live guitarist Eric Dover as the lead vocalist. Matt Sorum, however, was not happy with that arrangement. But this resulted in the album It's 5 O'Clock Somewhere, released in February of '95. The music and vocals are ballsy, with his guitars up front and center. A lot of screaming, half-cocked wah tone throughout, which has been Slash's signature. And Slash just let it all out there. It has more of a feel like Appetite for Destruction, very raw and edgy. And considering that these are songs that Slash was pitching to the band, it was obvious what direction Slash was wanting to go in musically. And it did well, selling over 1 million copies in the US, even with little promotion from the label. Slash's Snake Pit toured to support the album, bringing in bassist James Lomenzo and drummer Brian Tichy from Pride and Glory, since Inez and Sorum had other commitments. So they got out there hitting the US, Europe, Japan, and Australia. It turned out to be a total breeze for the band. No drama, fun bandmates, just pure rock. So Slash was having a blast, but then somebody straddled over and ended up taking a very large dump upon his parade. Geffen Records contacted Slash and said that Axl was now ready to do the next GNR album. And so the label ended up pulling the money from Snake Pit's next tour, and the band ended up breaking up not long after that. But then, in October of '96, Slash announced he was no longer a part of Guns N' Roses. He said he and Axl had not been seeing eye to eye for some time. They tried to collaborate, but Slash was simply now out of the band. Another factor for Slash leaving was Axl's choice for a new Guns N' Roses member. Paul Huge, who went by Paul Tobias, was Axl Rose's childhood friend from Indiana. In '94, Axl insisted that Paul join Guns N' Roses as a rhythm guitar player after Gilby Clarke was fired. The other band members did not want this. Slash said he tried to work with Paul, but found him bland, uninteresting, and arrogant. Slash said that Paul had no distinct personality or guitar style, for that matter. In the studio one day, Paul made a negative comment about Slash. So Matt Sorum, the drummer, confronted Paul, saying, "You don't do that when I'm in the room." This led to an argument with Axl, and Matt got the boot. And as Paul followed Matt out of the studio, Matt Sorum said, "Do you feel good about breaking up one of the greatest bands that ever lived?" Matt Sorum then called Paul the Yoko Ono of Guns N' Roses. Duff McKagan also refused to play with Paul, calling him Axl's untalented yes man. Duff McKagan felt the whole band needed to approve a new member, not just Axl unilaterally hiring his friend. In Slash's 2007 autobiography, he said his decision to quit wasn't just based on Paul. It was also due to Axl Rose being late all the time, alleged legal manipulation to control the band, as well as the early departures of Steven Adler and Izzy Stradlin. And the band's failure to collaborate resulted in no new album being recorded. So after Slash quit, the band went on another hiatus. Axl took more control, and Guns N' Roses would not release their next album, Chinese Democracy, until 2008, after a long and tumultuous recording process. They would get Buckethead into that lineup, as I covered on my Buckethead video in depth. GNR's career had remained a patchwork ever since this period when Slash had left. In '97, after touring with the first Snake Pit lineup, Slash wanted to put together a new version of the band. He and bassist Johnny Graperic started looking for a new singer. And they got like 300 audition tapes, mostly from unknown vocalists. For a minute, they thought about John Stevens from the band Noiseworks. He had been jamming with Slash for a while. But Stevens ended up going back to Australia to do solo stuff. So eventually they settled on Rod Jackson, who sang in the band Ragdoll. Johnny played Slash a tape of the guy and Slash dug it. They got Ryan Roxy from Alice Cooper's band on guitar, Matt Love on drums. They ended up moving into Slash's new home studio in Beverly Hills to rehearse and record. With Jack Douglas at the helm to produce, they split recording duties between Slash's home studio and Ocean Wave Recording. They also brought in some other musicians, Teddy Andreas, Jimmy Zavala, and Lee Thornburg. And at first the label was into it. They had set a release date for February 2000, but then Geffen, who had merged with Interscope, told Slash that it just wasn't their kind of music. So Slash bought the album back and signed with Coke Records instead. After they finished the album, Ryan Roxy left the group, and Kerry Kelly joined as the new guitar player. Kerry had played with Warrant, Rat, and a band called Big Bang Babies. The album Ain't Life Grand came out in October 2000 on Coke Records. Mean Bone was the first single, and the album did not do as well as the first Snake Pit record. Reviews were mixed. A lot of people were saying there was a lot of hard rock cliches, and they sort of saw the band as Slash with a bunch of hacks behind him. So Coke Records ended up dropping the band 2 months after the album came out. Slash's Snake Pit supported AC/DC on their Stiff Upper Lip tour in 2000. They only played the first 2 shows before Slash ended up getting sick and having to drop out. He was ordered to stay at home and rest, reportedly due to pneumonia. But it turned out that he actually had cardiac myopathy from years of drugs and alcohol. Slash's heart had swelled up and almost ruptured. After getting a defibrillator put in and doing physical therapy, Slash then rejoined the band to keep touring. They rescheduled their U.S. tour for summer 2001, co-headlining a few shows with Billy Idol. After the tour ended, Slash hid on the bus until the rest of the band left, and then at that point he announced he was breaking up Snake Pit in early 2002. He said it was mainly because of issues with their singer's work ethic and reliability. If there's one takeaway throughout this entire thread, it's that Slash was really big on being punctual. He really did not tolerate people just not showing up or being late. So after Snake Pit broke up, Slash started working on a solo album in 2002. He brought in Steve Gorman, Black Crowes drummer, and a bassist on the new project. They wrote the music for Fall to Pieces. Duff McKagan reformed his band Loaded, previously his group from the Beautiful Disease tour, adding Jeff Reading, Mike Squires, and Jeff Roos. When famed hard rock drummer Randy Castillo sadly passed from cancer in 2002, Slash, Duff McKagan, and Matt Sorum played a benefit show to raise money and honor him. Josh Todd and Keith Nelson of Buckcherry, plus Be Real and Send Dog of Cypress Hill also performed. Realizing that their musical bond remained, the trio began practicing with Todd and Nelson working on Dirty Little Thing. But they ultimately decided not to form a band with them. During a Loaded gig at the Viper Room in West Hollywood, Duff McKagan reconnected Slash with his old junior high school buddy, Dave Kushner. Slash said Kushner brought a cool vibe and was a perfect fit when he was invited to jam and then join the group. Izzy Stradlin also got into the fold and played with them for about 2 weeks, suggesting Duff and Stradlin sing as they do a van tour of clubs. Slash wasn't sure if Stradlin was joking or serious, but then after auditioning Kelly Schaefer of Atheist, Izzy said, "That's it, I'm out," and they split. So after Schaefer's audition flopped, the band kept looking for singers. Tons of singers tried out. Sebastian Bach, Travis Meeks, Sean Albro. Miles Kennedy actually turned down Matt Sorum's invite. Ian Asper and Mike Patton from Faith No More also passed on an audition. The band wanted to try out STP's Scott Weiland, who actually worked out with Duff McKagan. Now, Scott had played with Kushner before and did some time in rehab with Sorum, so they sent him 2 CDs full of songs. He thought the first one really sucked, but he dug the second one. saying it was kind of like early STP, but he turned it down since STP was still together. However, when STP broke up in 2003, the band sent Scott Weiland some new songs. Scott added some vocals in the studio, creating Set Me Free, but still, Scott Weiland was iffy about joining, even though he gave them the track and played a gig with them. But after they recorded Set Me Free and a Money cover, Scott Weiland joined. Set Me Free actually did well, hitting number 17 on rock radio with no label backing it whatsoever. And they picked the name before a Hulk screening. Slash liked Revolver for its meanings, while Scott Weiland suggested Black Velvet Revolver, and ultimately they settled on Velvet Revolver. So they started writing together and laying down some tracks, but then Scott ended up getting busted for drugs. But it obviously served as a really good inspiration, because after jail, Scott ended up writing lyrics for Fall to Pieces. And once Scott was free, Velvet Revolver started recording for real. They did Slither, but producer Bob Ezrin didn't like it too much. Then they recorded Headspace with producer Josh Abraham and really liked the result, so they ended up using him for the whole album. So after their album Contraband blew up, Velvet Revolver got courted by the big labels, so they went with RCA. Most of the album was laid down at NRG Studios, but Slash did his guitar parts at some little place on Highland and Sunset. Scott could only work for a few hours a day because of the court orders keeping him in a halfway house. As their debut Contraband was put out on June 8, 2004, the song Slither helped it explode, hitting number 1 on the Billboard charts, and sold 250,000 in the first week. When all the dust settled, Contraband ended up moving 4 million copies worldwide, 2.9 million in the US alone. It went double platinum. Velvet Revolver really showed Slash growing musically. Fall to Pieces kicks off with that classic semi-clean Slash tone, reminiscent of Paradise City and Knockin' on Heaven's Door, and then Scott's vocals take it somewhere new. Smooth as hell, but he could belt it out too. And they toured hard for this album. They toured through the US, hit Europe twice, Australia, Japan. They also played the Ozfest and Download festivals. They spent a total of 19 months on the road. But then the cracks started showing. Everyone but Kushner fell off the wagon. Now they did clean up to make the next record, but Slash had felt by that time that they had already lost Scott, and that the spirit of the band was declining, and the grind took its toll. Nearly 2 years of shows wore them down. Velvet Revolver hit the road to support Libertad. They toured the US with Alice in Chains. They also had plans for Japan and Australia, but things went south really quick. The Japan tour got nixed when they were denied visas. Australia got postponed and then canceled. Scott's drug issues were starting to crop up. He ended up having to check himself into rehab again. And then in November of 2007, Scott Weiland got popped for DUI. He had crashed his car on an LA highway, and he already had a prior and was released on $40,000 bail. But they still did a US and UK tour in early 2008, and they also even played in Dubai for the Desert Rock Festival as well. But Scott, being back in his old ways, was starting to really wear on the other guys. Tensions were boiling over, especially during the UK leg in March. By this time, they weren't even talking to Scott. The most communication they had with him was arguments on stage. And everything blew up in Glasgow on March 20th. Scott Weiland told the crowd that it was the band's last tour, completely blindsided the other guys, but not entirely, because they were already planning on kicking him out. Matt Sorum ended up posting about it on his website. Scott Weiland ended up firing back, saying that he tried to stay cordial, but the band was just acting like a gang at that point. Egos and jealousy got the best of them. Slash kept maintaining that that wouldn't be their last tour, but on April 1st, Scott said he was officially out. He had also had a little side project with Matt Sorum, which was a cover band called Camp Freddy, and he also left that group as well. He ended up going back to STP before they fired him again in 2013. But Velvet Revolver had totally crashed and burnt. Their second album, Libertad, did not live up to Contraband. They got some mixed reviews, sales were really disappointing, and the 2007-2008 tour was just the last straw. So after Weiland was out, Velvet Revolver went into limbo. They started recording, searching for a new singer, but it was sporadic. They'd audition guys and then go do solo stuff, come back to the band, and then bail again. And then in 2012, they did a full-on one-off reunion with Scott Weiland, which is another road recovery benefit for the late friend John O'Brien. Things were actually starting to look up a little bit, and Scott was expressing interest with getting back together with them and continuing Velvet Revolver, even making references to Maynard from Tool, saying if he could do Tool and A Perfect Circle, then he totally should be able to do STP and Velvet Revolver. And he even went so far as to tell ABC Radio that they were back for an album and a tour. But Slash came out a couple days later and said, no way, that is not happening whatsoever. On December 3rd, 2015, Scott Weiland died on his tour bus. It was ruled as an accidental overdose, cocaine, booze, and MDA. But in 2024, Scott's widow, Jamie, would come out and claim that it wasn't an overdose, just that extended heroin use and smoking resulted in his main artery being 95% blocked. Either way, Scott lived fast and hard, and it definitely took its toll. And of course, this tragedy killed any shot at a Velvet Revolver reunion with him. In 2016, Slash and Duff jumped back into Guns N' Roses. They ended up headlining Coachella in 2016, and they ended up hitting the road for the Not in This Lifetime tour, and it was a massive success. It ended up pulling in over $584 million by 2019. In 2021, Slash laid down his first new GNR track since '94, Absurd and Hard School. And all throughout his career, Slash has also mixed it up with a lot of other musicians. And as of most recently, in 2024, Slash came out with what many say is his quintessential solo album. The list of singers he has on there is a who's who of anybody and everybody. Hell, he even has Brian Johnson from AC/DC on it, actually sounding low and bluesy, instead of like he's gonna pass out from screaming falsetto while holding his breath. Beth Hart is a mainstay on the blues scene, part Diana Krall and part Janis Joplin. She has one hell of a bluesy rasp. Tash Neal brings top-level vocal to Livin' for the City, which is a Stevie Wonder cover. Slash totally rocked it up and did it proud. His cover version still retains all the elements of the original, but the gain is notched up about 20 times from the original version, with his signature style all over it. Other killer performances include those from ever-soulful Gary Clark Jr., Chris Robinson of the Black Crowes, Iggy Pop, Billy Gibbons, and a slammin' country blues tune sung by Chris Stapleton. Paul Rodgers even came out of hiding to lay down his smooth vocal on Born Under a Bad Sign, for the best version of that song since Pat Travers did it back in the day. But it's obvious from this one that Slash really wanted to get deep into his roots. Slash is one of those rare guitarists that has something for everybody. While not a shredder on that level of Guthrie or Yngwie, he can still bring the intensity with some killer legato runs. And for those that prefer a laid-back, more feeling-based approach, Slash can slow bend anybody to tears with very little effort. The Slash has done so much in his career. He's one of the most beloved guitar players among his peers, and he's not showing any signs of slowing down. Looking forward to more from the Slash camp. One thing's for sure, it will always be solid through and through. Thanks to my kind subscribers for the inspiration and motivation. 100% credit goes to you for keeping this channel going. And if you haven't had the chance to subscribe, give the subscribe button a good smack and join the family. And also, if you could kindly smack the like button, I do appreciate it. I want to thank you so much for watching.